Mark and Sydney, did your communication evolve? I know you started working together at the lab, but that was several years ago. So as the project grew and evolved, did your communication process or the directive that you thought you wanted initially shift and change?
Yeah, well, I guess it's sort of a yes and no, you know, because we did actually use some of the score that we made during the labs, but you know, we did stay in communication throughout the the years between the labs and actually going into production. But you know, like I guess sort of the jumping off point for us was like I had a custom made Pandora station that I would write to, and so with Mark it was like, we just sort of discussed the bands that were on this Pandora station, and then from there that led to like, okay, so like what is it about this song that you like? And then that led to a conversation about like individual instruments and individual feelings and stuff like that. And yeah, the great thing about working with him is that we were able to talk about, like not like the thread count or the material, but it was like, okay, so the scene is about like we want to have a sense of hope, and then I could just leave that with Mark, and then just walk away, and then he'd send me something, and I'd be like, that's amazing.
I think we had an advantage too because the story evolved, but the sort of overall arc remained the same, and the cues that we had worked on at the labs had more to do with kind of the place, the setting, and the overall story arc rather than spots with individual characters. And so I think that's why it translated even as the cut changed quite a bit.
Yeah, that was the thing that was so great for me, was because, like I said, I was like, I didn't want to use flutes, I didn't want to use drums, but this film takes place in the Southwest, so I did want to have a sense of place. And, what Mark did, I think he used like a steel guitar, is that right? And a pipe organ? Yeah.
Pump organs, yeah.
Okay, yeah. But yeah, he was still able to like sort of take that direction, but then still give the story a sense of place. And I think the film is so much better because of that.
That's great. I know, like, in your film, and in most documentaries, there tends to be a lot of talking. Is it different scoring something like that, scoring a documentary as opposed to a narrative?
Yeah, it's definitely different for me than either film or television, just because there is so much talking, but not only just talking, you want them to focus more. You don't have to help it so much. With narrative, you need to help the story or the acting or things that they weren't happy with is usually where we come in and fix things. And in documentaries, you're not fixing anything. You can actually harm things. So I think the most important thing for me when I'm doing a documentary is find the right tone and mood, and then just kind of set the table and back away and let them eat. So that was the tough thing. And then the other tough thing about this one was feeling like you're working on something with such importance and responsibility. That was probably the hardest part about this documentary. I kept, I was my worst critic, and those notes have to be better, but there's only 12 to pick from, and pick something now, you've got to send something to them, and they were great about, helping me through those breakdowns.
I mean, for me, I think there's more difference between different kinds of narrative films than there is between different kinds of. There's more difference between a narrative film and a documentary film, or less difference between a narrative film and a documentary film than different kinds of documentaries. And there are plenty of documentaries that don't have a word spoken at all, but they're still called documentaries. So I kind of feel like, having worked both in narrative films and docs, that actually the film calls for what it calls for, and whether it's fiction or not fiction is way down on the list in terms of what the film is calling for.
But Miriam, do you agree? Because you do so many docs.
Yeah, I think that exactly what Todd said. I've been doing docs a long time, and I've seen an incredible evolution of the filmmaking and an opening up of the possibilities cinematically and the craft of filmmaking. When I first started, people would get really freaked out if you did anything that sounded, that they even noticed the music. And now filmmakers are understanding the power of it as a really strong element of storytelling. And, you know, it can be subtle and like Todd says, it really depends on the film. I mean, I've done films that feel like an action film, even though it's a documentary. And so once again, also, as Blake said, I think for me, it's always about feeling this incredible responsibility to the characters in the film and to the filmmakers and the passion and commitment they've made to telling this story in an honest and ethical way. So I think we're a little bit more tuned in to the subtleties in documentaries and setting the tone in a way that really isn't manipulative, unless that's the intention. I mean, you have to be really intentional.
I did have an interesting thing in this documentary, though, where they weren't allowed to film any of the court case, any of the proceedings. So they came up with a very creative way of having the attorneys reread transcripts from the trials. And you guys in the first meeting, one of the scenes, you said, I mean, he just sits there and he just reads it. It needs to, you know, we wish it was a court case and it was scored. And I said, well, why don't I score it as if it were a scene from A Few Good Men?
We want people to cry now.
Yeah. But in that way, I had to sort of invent the scene in my brain of watching him in the court case and, you know, how it would be cut if you were watching A Few Good Men or something like that, and score that, and then still be out of the way of the all the
and
talking.
those were the scenes that,
What?
because we had temp music there, but those were the scenes that really came alive after Blake was involved in the film, I'd say. Those sort of putting people in the courtroom, making them feel like they're a part of the journey with our characters.
One thing I'd add would be that I try to remind documentary filmmakers to open the film up. For example, in our film that we did, they're usually in a documentary film, people are talking from the very first frame. In this film, there was not a word spoken until maybe a minute 15 into the film. And then the editor made sure that he provided music moments in the film. And that made it much more like a narrative experience for me. And I think that helps bring, you know, the emotion that we're trying to get across with the film and the music, you know, to actually find a place where it's working. You know, if you create those moments. Other filmmakers that I work with, maybe they're not quite in tune with that idea, and they don't, if they're reminded of it, they try to do it, but there are other filmmakers that really seem to be on board with that, and I think it's a big difference. It makes the two mediums much more similar.
And I just wanted to add that one of the things that Justin and I would often talk about was where the points of the music would then, you know, segue into silence, and you had a very keen sensibility of, no, the music is still, it's characterizing the scene. And I wanted to just have you talk a little bit about how you saw this pastiche still be a part of the scene but not get in the way of the scene. Because I found it very hard. I wanted to, there shouldn't be music here. It's like, no, it's fine, Catherine.
But sometimes, you know, you were right, and we would just take it out. You know, I think it's a process, you know, of just trying things and seeing how they work. And I think oftentimes, like musically anyway, I have stuff that just is amazing in my head, and then we do it, and I'm like, that did not work at all. And you know, one of the things that like also, like anything that sounded traditional or was expected, it's a college satire. And so, you know, why would we put jazz and classical music in a college movie? I don't know, but I wanted to. And so it was a lot of sort of figuring out how to put the square, you know, peg in the round hole. Is that the right?
Craig and David, they came together as, I think, Craig, you described it as a rom-com parody. So what is unique about doing the score for a film like that?
In order for the film to work, the score had to be a perfect facsimile. Not a facsimile, it had to be an emotional, sweeping, pan rom-com, history of rom-com score. So it was, you know, it was intense musical character acting. And, you know, normally when David and I work together, and partly because of the uniqueness of, and history of our relationship, I get to do a lot of weird stuff that a lot of other directors maybe don't know I do, but David does, and so he encourages me to do it. In this, it was like, not about that at all. Would you say?
The movie rides the line, and the score just the same, between spoofing and somewhat making fun of the whole genre and also still being the genre. And so the score does this incredible job of indicating and reminding you and sort of spoofing the scores of rom-coms, but at the same time involving you with the characters and deepening your investment in the relationship at the same time, which is incredible.
Like the goal we were going for the score as well as the movie is that you're cringing and you're like, oh no, why am I crying? This is terrible. I shouldn't be crying, but
Because at every point, our job, our goal in the movie was to make it as purposely terrible as possible. And yet still,
but it had to embody the best of the genre at the same time. So that was a really fun assignment, and we had to do it so fast.
That's the miraculous thing about this one for me too, is with the timing of it, as often the case, but even more so, was so fast too, because by the time we figured out what was happening, it was a few weeks until Sundance, and we just finished the movie the other day.
As such, I have to give props to my co-composer, Matt Novak, because I certainly wouldn't have been able to do it by myself in that amount of time, on that scale.
What was his role?
Honestly, we just divided everything down the middle. There were about 60 cues to write in a month, and some of them had to be like 90-piece orchestra, but there was no budget, and some of them were more sort of acoustic guitar based and everything in between. And so we just divided all the cues to our strengths. And
you would pass the Pro Tools sessions back and forth.
back and forth. It was wild. It was great.
But
it could easily have happened.
Is that typical now, where you're finding that you need to, bring in either a co-composer or someone to work with you in order to hit the deadline? This is for the composers.
I have done it as fun. I mean, I think it's enjoyable, and I get a lot of information from. And I think Heather McIntosh is here. Yeah, I did another lab alum, Heather McIntosh. We did a movie together this summer, not because of a deadline, but because I knew she knew things that I didn't know, and I kind of wanted to learn them.
I think what I'm discovering is that even if you don't have giant budgets, there's just so much, it's so labor intensive I work with live musicians always, and it's very labor intensive to get the music prep and when you have the final tracks to mix everything. And so over the years, I've gotten more into working, having people I work with regularly as a support team, whether it's in music prep or an engineer I use, or even an assistant now for the first time in my life. And it makes it so much more enjoyable to be able to spread out some of the workload.
It's nice too, because you can, Nathan, who I've worked with for 5 years, he writes some of the music on Arrow and some other TV shows. It depends on the time, the deadlines, and it also depends on what I really want to focus on. Like, sometimes I get really stingy with things, and like, no, I'm not letting anyone have their hands on the case against 8, that's mine, but you know what, there's 3 fight scenes in Arrow that I do not want to do, so Nathan, happy Monday. And but you have to trust the person you're working with, because I've also done collaborations that were miserable, because you're actually competing with each other on the same thing. So it just depends on the project.
With my co-composer, I would just say that I brought him on because there was like a financial reality to it. We had a fairly limited budget, and it wasn't the kind of thing we were going to be able to hire an orchestra at the end of it. And he's a cellist and a pedal steel player. His musical skills complemented mine. Plus, we're tennis partners, so we get along well. And we were looking for a project to do together. It was a combination of friendship and also just a logistical side. So.
I really think that one composer and one director is something magical, because there is a time you spend together and the communication you share, that the director is almost like my advisor. If I don't know how to, if I need to decide to go to left or right, I just call the director. And actually, I find it quite magical that to the end you get quicker, and the more you know what you want to achieve per scene or what the overall impact of the score should be for the film, then really talking to the director is really the big help. And I agree with Miriam, having a team around you is really good, but I think the composing I like to do myself.
Oh yeah, I would never, I'm not a co-composer type, but I do think it's fun to get other people's input and reactions. And sometimes I had my assistant watch the whole film through with me after I finished writing all the cues. It was fun to let her just say how it felt to her and something. It was really interesting.
And I think there are also certain projects, if you do a big action project, of course you need assistance because of the workload and the amount of music you need to. I'm sure Blake can tell more about that. But on a project that is so intimate, where you need, like we had a movie about a 17-year-old girl and her rebellion with the world, and how do you cope with that? And we had the idea of having music as continuous part of her character, and whenever I needed inspiration, I just had David for that, and he knew the movie the best. So I guess it's all about knowing the movie as good as you can. So that's actually the most inspiring. And then I guess whenever I knew where we wanted to get to, then I got there very quickly. So it's more about finding the direction, I guess.
It's also nice to have people around you that aren't yes men or yes women. Because we work in a bubble and we think everything we do is awesome. Awesome, and then you pull someone in that you trust and say, "What do you think?" I don't know. That's kind of cheesy. And even when the directors aren't telling you it, or you still get a second opinion from someone who understands the art form. And one last thing before I send this to them, will you take a look? Are you moved? So that's really nice too when you work with people. You're not so isolated.
I haven't used a co-composer, but along the same lines, I give some props to my music editor, who was my non-yes man. Because I've done some work in television as well, and it's just brutal. I mean, I spotted one episode on Thursday and then delivered 29 minutes on Sunday night. It's like, got to a point where it's like, I'm gonna die if this continues like this. But music editor is a guy who's also not only my right-hand man of getting things done, but became my spiritual advisor and psychologist. I remember something we were talking about a little bit ago, where the producers have a whole set of adjectives they wanted for something. The director had something polar opposite of that. I'm freaking out. It's like, okay, so if I do a little bit of, they want this little green, and they want more cellos, and they want this stuff. I do all this, and my editor said, "Ryan, chill. Just do your thing. That's what they want you to do." And then I find that you do your thing, and then they're happy, for the most part.
I find a good music editor can also represent you on the mixing stage. A lot of times, certainly in the case of They Came Together, we were writing so down to the wire, and they were already mixing the movie. And so my music editor, Emily, was there essentially being our creative rep and our ears, because
She was awesome to do that, and she was because the guys gave everything in pieces and stems and stuff, and little tweaks based on what we're seeing in the mix stage she could do without having to go back through the composers. And there was just a lot of. She was a great liaison.
I had a similar experience with our music editor, Jessica Harrison, in that she was not only sensitive to what I had created, and in terms of the stems, and able to manipulate what she needed, but we all had such a nice synergy. The three of us, there was a lot of trust, and it was a very organic kind of flow of things, and I could just walk away, because I too was under a heavy deadline and had to do revisions and whatnot, but I just felt that there was such a, we just were all trying to get it done. It wasn't territorial or an ego thing, like, well, no, this is now it's my cue, kind of thing. And I think fundamentally, everything to me in life is relationships anyway. Everything is about that kind of synergy you have with somebody. And we were really fortunate that we had a team of people, from the producers on through, the whole chain of, the whole team was just about getting this film produced and serving Justin's vision for it. And the music editor she was incredible. Major props to her.
Yeah, it's such a talent that I think a lot of people don't realize how important they are. I finished a TV series a few years back where I got the last episode and the director said, you don't need to score the first 10 minutes. And I said, really? And because I had delivered, stems for the previous 4 or 5 episodes, and the music editors took those stems and created new cues that were just as, probably better than I would have written. I don't know. It's just, it was great.
Yeah, maybe this is a chance to say that, for a lot of independent films, the idea of hiring a music editor is not really something they're thinking about. They don't have the budget for it, but I always try to convince them that even if you can't bring somebody on for the whole time, good idea to have them there when you're spotting, maybe bring them back, when you get down to recording. It not only logistically saves a lot of work for other people, but it's a real help for the composer to have somebody to bounce ideas off. And just
At the end of the day, it's a money saver in a big way, I think. I think at the end of the day, having a music editor pays for itself, and then some, just in terms of them catching things that need to happen and expediting things. And, more money would be wasted, I think, in my project if we didn't have that person.
You guys did some cool things of, you would take pieces I'd written for other things, or it was not even in the movie anymore, and you would place them in other spots to sometimes help me out of a jam. Be like, well, what about this piece that you wrote? Try this, we put it here. So you were essentially music editing.
I think it was usually your idea, though.
I don't know, I was drunk.
Tonight, we, as I said before, we used a lot of Todd's temp music, and I thought, oh, I have a little bit of experience. It's probably a great thing for a composer to use their own temp music. And at a certain point, Todd was having a little bit of a rough time with one of the cues, and I said, do you like to use your temp music, us to use temp music, and for you to, and I just assumed it would be a great thing for him.
Yeah, it's horrible to have your own music as the temp. I find it actually, in talking about composers, and I feel like temp music is ideally inspiring and challenging for a composer. And when you encounter your own cue that you have all of this history and emotion with in a film, it's not a challenge necessarily in a good way. You kind of feel like you're boxed in a little bit by your own self. Whereas if it's something you're like, I don't know how they did that, and I definitely don't know how I'm going to do that, then it's exciting, and you're going to find something new. I do understand why it makes sense as shorthand to use a composer's. If you're cutting a film, you want to know that their, whatever their voice is going to work in your movie. But it definitely isn't, for me, doing me a favor as a part of the collaborative conversation of coming up with whatever the real score is going to be.
I had this great conversation with a filmmaker this morning. We were talking about temp music, and she was telling me that this is just, I think, the most ideal situation. She would say to the composer, give me some tones, some sounds, after you talk about the palette you're going to work with. Give me some tones, give me some things that are fast, some things that are slow, give me just some tracks that I can combine. And then let the editor and the filmmaker use that stuff to define the punctuation marks of where the music's going to be, play the kind of the feeling, the tone of what it might be. But that would free up the composer then to make it into music and also give the information. That would be so helpful. I'd love to work with someone that did that. I think it'd be a really great thing to try, so I'm going to do that next time.
And to do that, you need to work early. It can't be 5 weeks before you sound mix. I've worked on a lot of projects where I've started a year before the film is even really assembled. And great. It's a really fun thing to just look at some footage and come up with a bunch of titles of cues. What would be the titles of some cues in this movie that we're making together? And I have my own studio, so it's not like I'm spending money to do it. And I just go make a bunch of music. A lot of times that stuff. I have another movie here called The Overnighters. I did a bunch of just acoustic guitar, really casual things that are in the final movie that were done way before the movie was even a rough cut.
And if you have a character in your movie that is playing any instrument for any amount of seconds, please bring us in early before you shoot that scene. Because we're just going to have to fix it, and you're going to say, why does it not look like you're playing what you're writing? And so bring us in early, please. Heather, that was for you.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah.